I'm here lecturing in Garmisch-Partenkirchen at the Marshall Center at a very interesting program on regional security with participants from all around the world. And they're so kind as to take an interest in the theory that I have co-developed on regional security complexes. So it's really fun to both present the theory, update the theory, and get the feedback from people with very different backgrounds. Yeah, the basic idea is that if you look across the world at security issues, they really tend to fall in chunks. That the Middle East is a regional security complex in the sense that you can't really understand one country in the Middle East, their security, without understanding what is happening to the whole region. You don't have to then look at Latin America to understand it. You look at the Middle East as the relevant context for every Middle Eastern country, and the same in Europe and so on. So you really, if you want to understand security in the world, you want to understand how each of these regional systems work, and then how that interacts with the global players. There is a tendency that we mostly talk about security as national or global. So if you say national, it doesn't really make that much sense, because if you say, what's the security of Turkey? It's not about Turkey. It's about Turkey's relationships to various other players that matter to them. So security is always relational. It is always about you in relation to someone else. And also global security doesn't really capture a lot of what is going on, because the world is not in sync. You might see that maybe things are improving in Latin America while it's going worse in the Middle East. You might also say that there are lots of things happening here that doesn't matter there. So the global doesn't really capture things. I hope that people are able to look at whatever region they are interested in and kind of build up their understanding of how does South Asia develop at the moment, what is happening in the Middle East and so on. And then you really have to build it from within first, and then add the great powers after. In contrast to the also media tendency to always overemphasize that this is probably Russia in the background playing there, where actually you first have to say what's at stake for those who live there. So that it is a good way to put together the picture. And then, of course, what is most dramatic if there is a change in our world map, if regional security complexes change. That happens very rarely. At the end of the Cold War, Southeast Asia and East Asia merged into one greater complex. But there are very few cases of that. And at the moment, one of the really big questions is, what is going to happen in Europe? What is happening over the relationship to Russia? Because after the end of the Cold War, we basically saw two different security complexes forming, one around Russia, a kind of post-Soviet sphere dominated by Russia, and one around the EU. And those two were actually just sitting next to each other back to back, but not involved in any intense rivalry. The reason why the world falls in regional chunks is basically because threats tend to travel more easily over short distance than over long distance. It's easier to project military force nearby than halfway around the globe. Migration, epidemics, a lot of things move on the map. But of course, there are certain things that don't. The world economy is much more deterritorialized. Cyber threats also are deterritorialized. And so some issues can be operated independent of space. So the whole theory would maybe break down ultimately if all our main dynamics were non-territorial. I would still argue what we see today is that the main security concerns are still linked to territory. You're mainly worried about someone nearby, and then you can kind of add these other threats as a kind of element in that game. But our map is still a map in the good old geographical sense. I think one important thing is to kind of acknowledge that things do look differently from different places in the world. So rather than assume that everything can be deduced from ideological principles or the values or something, it actually matters whether you're thinking from Paris or you're seeing it from Washington, or you're seeing it from Nairobi. You have to acknowledge that we are in different settings, and we have to be able to talk to each other about how security looks from different parts of the world. So therefore, I think it's incredibly important to do things like what is being done here in bringing people together, talking from their different backgrounds, and that in a sense makes even more sense when you acknowledge that the world is diverse and regionalized and not just about one story. Oh, I'm very impressed by the group of people. I mean, bringing together people with not only so different national backgrounds, but also so different professional backgrounds and different areas of expertise. That's extremely inspiring. I think the questions, the discussions were really to the point.